Hello, my name is Sarah. I'm here to help you learn the scientific method. The scientific method is a step-by-step process that scientists have developed to help them solve problems and test new ideas. Every scientific experiment performed is an example of the scientific method in action, but it is also used by non-scientists in everyday situations. Now let's talk about the steps of the scientific method. Number 1, make an observation and ask a question. Number 2, form a hypothesis. Number 3, make a prediction. Number 4, perform a test or experiment. Number 5, analyze the result. And number 6, form a conclusion. The exact steps of the scientific method vary from source to source, but the general procedure is the same thing: acquiring knowledge through observation and testing. Now, let's build some understanding on the scientific method by applying its steps to a practical problem from everyday life. Your desktop computer or PC is not powering on. The first step is to make an observation or ask a question. Let's suppose that you are in front of your PC and you press the power button. However, your PC does not power on. The scientific method starts when you ask a question about something that you observe. In this scenario, we ask, I press on the power button, but why won't my PC power on? In reality, both making observations and asking questions tend to happen around the same time, as we can see a confusing occurrence and immediately think, why is it happening? Step number 2 is forming a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an educated guess about how things work, and it's an attempt to answer questions with an explanation that can be tested. For example, we may hypothesize that the reason the PC doesn't power on is because the electrical outlet is broken. The hypothesis is not necessarily the right explanation. Instead, it's a possible explanation that we can test to see if it is likely correct or if we need to make a new hypothesis. Step number 3 is making a prediction. A prediction is an outcome we'd expect to see if the hypothesis is correct. In this case, we can predict that if the electrical outlet is broken, then plugging the PC into a different outlet should fix the problem. Step number 4 is perform a test or experiment. To test the hypothesis, we need to make an observation or perform an experiment associated with a prediction. An experiment must have an independent and dependent variable. An easy way to think of independent variable is the independent variable is what you change, and the dependent variable is what changes because of that. For instance, since we are testing if the power outlet is broken, the independent variable would be the power outlet, and the dependent variable is the power on the PC. You can also think of the independent variable as the cause and the dependent variable as the effect. Step number 5 is analyze the result. The results of a test may either support or contradict a hypothesis. If the PC powered on, then the hypothesis is supported, it is most likely correct. But if the PC does not power on, then the hypothesis is not supported, it is most likely wrong. Step number 6 is form a conclusion. The last step of the scientific method is to reflect on our results and use them to guide on our next steps. If the PC powered on, then the hypothesis is supported, and we might need to do additional tests to confirm it or change it to be more specific. For example, we might investigate why the power outlet is broken. If the hypothesis was not supported, then we would come up with a new hypothesis. For instance, the next hypothesis might be that there's a broken wire in the PC. Now that we have seen the scientific method step by step, let us look at it again, this time using a flowchart. Scientists use the scientific method in their research, but it is also used by people like us who are not scientists in our everyday lives. Even if you are not consciously aware of it, you may have used the scientific method many times when solving problems around you. For example, say you are at home and a light bulb goes out. Noticing that the light bulb is out is an observation. Then you would naturally ask, why is the light bulb out? After that, you would come up with possible guesses or hypotheses. For example, you may hypothesize that the bulb has burned out and make a prediction that replacing the bulb will turn the light back on. Then you would perform a very small experiment in order to test your hypothesis. You would replace the light bulb and analyze the data. Did the light come back on? If the light turned back on, you would conclude that the light bulb had in fact burned out. But if the light still did not work, you would come up with other hypotheses such as the socket doesn't work, part of the lamp is broken, or the fuse went out, etc., and test those hypotheses. In most cases, the scientific method is an iterative or repeated process. In other words, it's a cycle rather than a straight line. The result of one go-round becomes feedback that improves the next round of question asking. Now let's have a quick knowledge check. Question number 1. Which step of the scientific method comes immediately after making observations and asking a question? A. Forming a conclusion. B. Performing an experiment. C. Analyzing the result. Or D. Forming a hypothesis. Letter D is correct. After making observations and asking a question, we must form a hypothesis. The hypothesis is then tested with an experiment and data is collected and analyzed. From the data, we can draw a conclusion. Question number 2. What is the last step of the scientific method? A. Performing an experiment. B. Analyzing the result. C. Forming a conclusion. Or D. Forming a hypothesis. C is correct. The last step is to form a conclusion. This can only be done after all of the other steps has been completed and evidence has been gathered that supports or does not support the conclusion. Question number 3. True or false? A hypothesis is an educated guess that explains why or how something occurs. The correct answer is true. A hypothesis is an educated guess or a guess you make based on information you already know. What did you learn today? Remember that you can learn anything as long as you put your heart and mind into it. Until our next learning session, goodbye!